This conference will now be recorded.
So, JoAnn, you want to kick us off with an introduction?
Yes, I am absolutely delighted today. I am meeting not only a famous author, a major general, but a woman who loves history and who researches it so thoroughly. Enjoyed it. I have someone who does things probably much better than me, but has an interest. Our guest has had a wonderful, distinguished career. Marie K. Eder. She's a retired U.S. Army Major General, is a renowned speaker and author, and a thought leader on strategic communication and leadership. She served in senior positions in the Pentagon, in the Department of Defense, and on the U.S. on the Army staff. General Eder is a former commanding general of the U.S. Army Reserves, Joint and Special Troops, Support Command, former deputy chief of the Army Reserve, and former chief of public affairs for the U.S. Army. As a civilian, Mary Kay Eder has served as director of public affairs at the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies in Germany, and as an adjunct professor and lecturer in communication and public diplomacy school and Sweden's International Training Command. In 2003, she received the Historic Hotels of America and recognized her as their 2023 Historian of the Year. That I think is fabulous. And then when she's not writing, lecturing, or traveling, she works with rescue groups, and she fosters rescue dogs. So thank you. I do it for cats, ferrets that my son has brought into the house. But welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you so much. I almost feel like I'm back home. So this is great.
And back home originally is?
Near Mercer, Pennsylvania, a little bit north of Pittsburgh.
Grove City?
Near Grove City, Stoneboro. It's not very large, but I went to Lakeview High School in Stoneboro and college in Edinburgh.
And a couple. A college is very familiar to us in Western Pennsylvania. Sal, would you like to start? Because I know you went and got the books and you've learned a lot.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before we started recording, I got the book, the Girls Who Stepped Out of Line, and I wanted to read that one because I know you've published many, including one that's related to dogs and maybe more geared to kids, but. I wanted to read that one in particular simply because I am a World War II buff. I love reading about World War II for various reasons, and of course, that book is set in that time period. So I guess my question is, maybe one question is exactly that: why did you pick that time period? Because I'm sure there's outstanding women in obviously in all time periods, and not only war but in peacetime. I mean, you could have picked something, I'm sure, all the way back to the Civil War, maybe Vietnam, Korea. Why did you pick that period? And then also, why did you pick? And for people that haven't read it, the book, each chapter is a different person. So it's almost like these little vignettes, which I think is really cool because I can pick it up for an hour, read one chapter, get the story from start to finish, and then the next day. By the way, my goal was to read one chapter every day. So then the next day you pick up the next chapter and it's another story. So why did you pick, I think it was 15 women that you cover in your book, again, each one in one chapter. So why did you pick that time period? Why did you pick those 15 women in particular? Because I'm sure there had to be many more that unfortunately had to be left out.
That's true. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, in 2017, I was asked to speak at a leadership conference for the Army. The main speaker had dropped out, so I was a substitute, and I had just finished reading the story of Stephanie Check, who had joined the Army early in World War II in the Women's Army Corps, and later became a counterintelligence agent. And I was intrigued because I didn't know this story. All this time in the Army, why don't I know this? Why don't I know these stories? So I talked about her a little bit at this conference. And then as the greater generation continues to depart this earth, I keep finding more stories. And so I saved them. I didn't quite know what I was going to do with them until a couple of years later in 2019, when I watched Alex Borstein receive the award for Best Supporting Actress. And she talked about her grandmother in World War II. And that was what led me to say, I need to put all of these together.
Very cool. Well, let me ask you just maybe a follow-up question. This is of the people that unfortunately could not make it into the book because again, there's a limit. Could you tell us about one in particular that just kind of didn't make it, but is important?
Well, there's so many, everybody is important. And certainly that's what I have found in talking about this book and about the people in it. No matter where I go, people come up to me afterwards and say, let me tell you about my mother, my grandmother, my dad. How do I find out more about my dad's unit or my grandfather's unit? And so some of what I wanted to do was to talk about these people and get their stories correct, because I would find lots of errors in some of the stories that I did find. Now, if you're not in the Army and you write about the Army, you're probably not going to get some of the minute details right that those of us who have been get a little antsy about. So you never want to watch a movie with me because I will correct everything in it. So it's that type of wanting to do right by them. And yes, there are people I had to leave out, or I couldn't find enough about them. I couldn't locate family members. I couldn't find photographs. And a couple of them that I wanted to include were photographers. And they were photographers with the 8th Air Force in England. So some of them have donated their papers to various places. And that's another thing I learned, is where there are locations of World War II records. For the WASP, for example, it's at Texas Women's University in Avenger Field in Texas, where the WASP trained. For Ida and Louise Cook, the British ladies who, well, helped save 26 families from certain death during the war, they were opera buffs. No, they weren't opera buffs. They were groupies. They were absolute groupies. And they donated all of their papers and photographs to the Victoria and Albert Museum theater collection. So it's been an interesting process to find out where information is and how to track it down and what the relationships are because of that. And one of the things that most intrigued me in this book was how many of these people knew each other or knew of each other, or were in the same place but at different times and had heard each other's stories. And you don't think that's possible in some parts of the world that are so large, but in some ways the Army, all of the services, and at that time were small in some ways. And so you do know about others, and you do know what's going on with them, even if there doesn't seem to be a large group around you to be mentors or leaders or even colleagues. That was a long answer to a very little question, but
Well, no, that's fine. I appreciate it. And by the way, just I have to do this sidebar for a second. For people that may listen to this even in the future, because that's the beauty of these recordings. If people ever have the opportunity, go to the Mighty Eighth Museum. That is, I believe technically it's in a town called Pooler. It's near Savannah, Georgia. But
yes.
I've had the opportunity to go there several times, and it is just an absolute fantastic museum. So anybody that again finds themselves in that Savannah area, the Mighty Eighth Museum is a must see if you like. I guess at that point, by the way, it wasn't even the Air Force; it was the Army Air Force.
Army Air
Uh,
Corps.
Army Air Corps.
And the
Thank you.
WASP were not part of that, but they include the WASP in their museum.
So anyway, it's a must visit. So JoAnn, back to you.
Yeah, there was two women from our area that were in the WASP. One was a lady from Carnelsville, and another was a woman from our local area, the Homestead area, Homestead Munhall area. And they, one of the women, Florence Schultz, she was nicknamed Schultz, they fought for a long time for women to be recognized for their service because they were just disbanded. Well, okay, we don't need you anymore. Goodbye. And it took so long for them to be recognized. I was appalled with the way they were treated, just dismissed. So I wanted to, in looking at the book, the girls who solved crime, I was, I think the word was just shocked that when the New York Police Department moved, they dumped all those records in the river. Oh, how did you find? But what got you interested in May Foley? Intrigued you with her?
Well, after The Girls Who Stepped Out of Line was published, one of my friends who lives in Florida said to me, "That was a great book, but you really should write about my husband's grandmother." And I said, "Well, tell me more." And so she sent me some of the newspaper articles, and I was hooked. That was before I knew there were no records or that I couldn't find a lot of other information from the NYPD. They don't have a historian. There was a New York Police Department museum that closed during COVID. And of course, all of these books have presented difficulties to me in research because of the first one I wrote during COVID, and the second one, there were still repercussions afterwards. But it certainly tells you that there are many go-arounds, and there's many ways to find what you want and need, even if they don't present themselves at first, but you just keep after them.
Were you able to talk to May Foley's grandsons?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Yeah. Were you able to talk to May Foley's family?
Yes, oh yes. I've spoken with both of her grandsons. This last fall, I was able to speak about the girls who fought crime in New York at the Union League Club. And after I was finished talking about the book, I introduced May Foley's grandson. He was there. And great-granddaughter, because her great-grandson and great-granddaughter are both still serving with the NYPD.
Oh, wow. That's phenomenal. So there's a family tradition now.
It's a very special night for them. Yeah.
Yes, I can imagine. What about her story intrigued you?
Well, I think the practicality of it. It's not about putting the force into law enforcement for her and for those who served at the time, nor was it about making a social statement. It was about service. And what she wanted to do was to look out for, take care of the people who were at risk, who might be scammed, who had children who ran away, for young girls who were on the street. So for her, it was about taking care of her community. And she'd started out in social work, so she had that knowledge of what people needed who were new to the city, because this is at the time there is so much immigration coming into New York all at once. And then the services that were needed to help people assimilate, to learn English, to learn how to put their kids into school, to help build playgrounds. There's a tenement museum in New York City that I intend to visit too, to get an idea just of the lifestyle. And while I was researching this, not last year, but in 2022, I spent an extra day in New York, and I found a tour guide who will take groups around the city, and he'll say, what specifically do you want to see? Do you want to see the 1970s? Do you want to learn about the post-war period? And I said, I want to learn about from 1923 to 1940, and I want to see where she lived, what subway she would take, what she saw. And he took me everywhere she would have walked, what she would have seen, where she worked, how she got there, the building of Rockefeller Center. And I learned a lot just from feeling like I had walked in her footsteps a little bit.
So let me ask you, without having you reveal too much, because you don't want to steal any of your thunder or any of your publisher's thunder, whatever. But can you tell us if there's more books coming? Because again, when I looked on Amazon, I saw that you had a variety of books and a variety of books, and I'll say in different genres or different for different ages, different audiences. So, um, is there something else coming, and is there something you can reveal about anything else that's coming?
Well, one of my publishers said to me about one of my communication books, a serious communication book. He said, "What are you going to write next?" And I said, "I want to write fiction. I want to write crime fiction." And he said, "No, you can't have one of those and one of these and one of them." And I said, "Why not?" So there is my fiction, which my agent is pitching in New York this week. But there is also a next one in the girls series, which will be about sports. And I'm about halfway through the initial draft of it, and it's going to be called The Girls Who Beat the Odds. And I reveal anything, so just ask me. I tell everything. I tell all
Well,
my
I do
secrets.
remember one of your characters actually in the book that I did read is was a tennis player, and there was a little bit of so cross currents there. Let's just say between the her work you know because of the war, because of the government, and her playing tennis. So that was kind of interesting too.
You know, what's interesting for so many of them is in the tennis player, she won 19 Grand Slams. She had her own line of clothing. She had a tennis racket that kids wanted to buy. So we think about all of the things that go with fame these days, and it was all there then too. And then it makes you think about, well, fame is really fleeting. It really is. Because most people didn't even know Alice Marble at all. And I certainly didn't before I started looking at this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'll be honest. Everybody knows Billie Jean King, but
Did not.
and maybe Maria Sharapova, and I'm going off the cuff here, but you're right. I didn't know her.
Well, and then you look at the legacy. So Alice Marble coaches a young Billie Jean King. Then there is that carryover to Serena and Venus Williams. And then they are supporting a very young Coco Gauff as she comes on the scene. So there's definitely a sense of legacy with all of this. And even for those that there's no personal sense of legacy, it's looking back to say, now that I know what they did and how important it was, I want to know more, and I look up to them because they set the table for us now.
So let me ask you
They were not only.
a little bit of a personal question, kind of as a sidebar, but I think you set me up a little bit for that. Um, why did you join the army? And would you recommend to a young person, either particularly female or just in general, that they join the army now?
I joined the Army at the time to gain experience, to gain some experience, and hopefully in the area of journalism or public relations. It didn't quite work out that way because I didn't quite know what I was doing as I started, but I eventually got to where I wanted to go and continued to have amazing opportunities to travel, to meet people, to try new things. And I think today, we had the recruiting slogan then, be all you can be, which is very true today too. To a young person, I would say, what do you want? Because there's an old quote from Lily Tomlin where she says, I always said I wanted to be somebody. I guess I should have been more specific. So you have to know what you want in order to be able to find a path towards it. And I think today the military has so many things to offer. If you want experience in any field, if you want to be a chef, there's the cook school can teach you that. There's so many trades you can learn. It doesn't have to be all college. Now everybody wants to play drones. And yes, we have drones. And gaming and war gaming. So there is something for everyone, whatever you want to do to try. And you don't have to keep doing the same thing for 20 to 30 years. You can try something 2 to 3 different things and see what you're good at, where you can grow from that, and do that for 3 to 5 years. And that's the average. People stay 3 to 5 years and then go on. And I think that's wonderful.
One of the things that I have noticed is that a young person, if they go into the armed services, it teaches them how to focus, teaches them responsibility and accountability. I was very proud of my son. He joined right after high school, and he National Guard afterwards. But he served what 6, almost 7 years, and then he became a police officer. And as a mother, you worry. Before when he came out, I was like, oh, this is good, you know. They really, I recommend service for everyone for 1 year at least, because it does teach them and helps them grow up, so to speak.
Well, I think it's like the gap year. You know, certainly I believe in something like 1 year of national service of some kind. It doesn't have to be military. You know, you can build trails through the woods or work for state government. And some states are trying this now, which I think is incredible. And it's a great way to give people a little bit of that space so that at 17, you don't find yourself in college. So you do have that little bit of a year to find and try and do other things and find something larger than yourself to believe in. And I think that's the most important part.
Well, we're diverging a little bit here from talking about the
Back
book,
to
which
the book.
is fine. Uh, Maybe let me ask you a question and related to this. I've been reading because I'm certainly not an expert on any of this, but I've been reading that the Army and the military in general, let's say the military in general, has been struggling with their recruiting quotas, the amount of people that they want to bring in, because to your point, obviously people leave, right? Some don't make it a lifetime career. So you have to be continuously replenishing, and that's fine. That's normal that for any organization. But they're not achieving the numbers they're looking for to bring in. So my question is, from your perspective, and I know you've been out now for a while, but still, why do you think that is, and what could they do different to correct that going forward?
Well, if I could solve many other problems in the world, I undoubtedly would. But um, I think that we have so many choices now. There are so many things you can do that it's very difficult to think I want to go into this lifestyle because it is a lifestyle. And because of that competition, well, from civilian business, the economy is doing well. There's so many other ways to find a job and a career and a way forward. I think there is a competition aspect to this that we need to think about and look at. And I know what the services are all doing, things that help improve their recruiting numbers. And maybe one day in the future, we will look at perhaps a call to national service for both men and women, whether it's military or it's in other ways. And I don't think that's a bad thing, not in our world today where we have issues with so much obesity, for example, or all of the other issues we have in our society with teaching civics or history. I mean, there's certainly a great lack of understanding about even our own history over the past 200 years, and it can lead to decision making, I think, that is just incorrect because we don't understand the past. And one of the things I found in doing this is I learned so much that I didn't know about not just World War II, but what it changed in our society. Because it's the first time women joined in large numbers and were permitted to. And so many people met their future spouses, whether they were in England or elsewhere during the war. And so you had people for the first time meeting other people from, well, I was in Pennsylvania and he was in Florida, and we're going to move to Georgia. And for the next 40 years, we're going to be docents at the Mighty 8th Air Force Museum. And so you would see those type of combinations that brought people all around the country together. So there is a shared experience. And for a nation of this size to find millions of people with shared experience. That's very difficult now because we're so fragmented. Not that I have an opinion about that or anything. But
I agree with you totally. What I wanted to ask, and this we're leading into this right now, is what do you see that young women need to know today?
I think that young women should know today that you need to find a sponsor, a mentor, a guide, and you don't just need one, you need two. You need somebody who's 1 to 2 steps ahead of you who can say, this is exactly what you do next in order to move up. You need to take this course. You need to learn how to do this particular computer program. But you also need somebody who has the longer term, overarching, strategic or visionary view who can say, if you do these things, you will naturally move up. Prepare yourself to become a leader, a manager, to take charge of things. We don't all have to want to be leaders and managers. I've had friends who said, I never want to do that again. I did it once. I didn't enjoy it. Now I want to strictly be a subject matter expert and do work in my field. So knowing who you are and what you want is probably the most important thing there is, plus finding those groups of people to tell you how to work things. So look at your smartphone. How many of us go to our friends and go, how do you turn this thing on? Or how do you do that program? Because I don't want to sit in a class and I'm not going to look it up. So we learn things from our friends that are very helpful to us.
One of the things that concerns me, the second wave of feminism, we won a lot of rights. When I first started in the business, I couldn't get a loan in my own name, yet I was making a lot more than my previous husband. And I find that young women don't know that, and that's why I'm so passionate about history, is those rights have been so dearly bought and fought for. And I was in some of the
One of
battles.
the places I got to
What
speak
do you
at,
think of? I just like to take young people.
one of the places I got to speak at
That,
was the Women in Negotiation Institute in New York a few years ago. And what they do is teach people how to negotiate salary, promotion. Because if you don't know, and there's all this secrecy about that kind of thing, then you don't know how to do it.
Mhm.
And I think that's an important thing. Certainly, Gen Z doesn't like that type of secrecy, and they're much more transparent about these types of things. But again, it's having the ability to learn how to do this that I think is so helpful.
When you were in the Army, did you have two mentors like you were describing? And could you maybe tell us about a particular situation, obviously without, saying anything confidential or any particular names, but any type of situation where they really helped you out, where they really maybe bailed you out of a difficult situation or a pickle?
Well, I'll tell you that for the longest time, I did not have a mentor because I was waiting to be discovered. I thought they came to you and said, you have so much potential. Let me help you. It doesn't work that way. You find them and you say, here's my folder, my file, my personnel file. I want to apply for this position. What do you think? And I think you're always so much more successful when you ask specific questions. I want to apply for this position. It's in Germany and it's doing this. What do you think? And so you get 3 or 4 of those types of opinions rather than generalized opinions. So I had finally asked several people, I want to apply for this position in Germany. Should I go for this? Should I do this? And you will get the no, you shouldn't, because you don't speak the language well enough, or it's probably going to be difficult getting. Once you get there, you can't leave for the next 2 years. And then you'll get the, I don't think you should apply at all. And then that person runs off and applies for it. So there's a little bit of the competition aspect to this sometimes. But when you get the genuine help, you again get those questions that help lead you to self-discovery. Well, have you considered this? Why do you want to go do this job? What is the thing you look forward to the most? So in essence, you end up coaching yourself through it. And I think that's what works.
Yeah. Let
And
me
I took
just
that
tell you,
job in Germany and I loved it.
yeah, from a personal perspective, for whatever it's worth, and I think this has changed, and what I'm about to describe is no longer true, but I was very lucky that I got to see this. When I started my professional career with Hewlett Packard, fresh out of the MBA, your boss would sit down with you, and again, I'm starting literally my first regular full-time job out of the MBA. I didn't know anything, and he would sit down with you and basically take you through your career path all the way to controller, because I was starting in accounting at that point. And you reminded me, because they would even tell you, okay, listen, you're going to have to do these rotations at these other facilities, because HP again was very big and rotating personnel around. We had people from other facilities, people from our facility were supposed to go to other facilities, and they would make it very clear to you, this is not a guarantee that you're going to have this progression, but as long as you continue to perform well in each one of these roles, this is your roadmap, this is your progression down to at least controller. And then of course there's other roles after that, right? Um, my belief is two things. Number one is that doesn't happen anymore because organizations don't have the financial resources to allow them to do that type of luxury training, mentoring, whatever you want to call it, people development. They're struggling for every dollar every single day. And two, I think frankly the environment has just changed. I mean, there's as companies get quicker to lay off people and people get quicker to go to the next assignment, there's less value in sort of laying out that long-term roadmap, because again, it could be 10 years for all of this to happen, right?
Mm-hmm. And
So
I think sometimes people make their own roadmaps too. And that's another thing. I learned a lot from writing this book too about leadership and about how things were in many ways the same then as they are now. So if you have come to the chapter yet on Charity Adams, the young woman who at the age of 26 commanded the only all-female, all-African-American unit to deploy during World War II. And how did she get ready for that? She taught herself. Because of COVID, there were so many libraries, museums I couldn't go to. I would call people and they either wouldn't answer the phone or they would answer and tell me, I can't get anything for you. So I started buying books online, which was the best thing I could have done. It took me back to their words originally, because so many people wrote memoirs and autobiographies right after the war. And when I read her autobiography, she tells you exactly how she taught herself, because she knew what she wanted. She wanted to have that opportunity to lead. And she'd graduated from college with a degree in math, science, and Latin. She was well qualified to do just about anything, but she had decided to take on that challenge to serve during the war. And when the opportunity came to command, she was more than ready. She knew how to do everything that a battalion commander would have to do to lead a unit of about 1,000 people. Most of them had never left home before. And so there were all types of leadership issues she had to face, but she was ready for it.
I was fascinated by the story of the 668 because I have been following them and what they accomplished. Ask you, the chapter opening with her turning down a job, an assignment. Am I reading that right? She said she turned it down. What happened to her then?
Well, at the end of the war, she was offered a chance to go into the Pentagon and work. She was actually at that time as a lieutenant colonel, and the highest ranking woman at that time was a full colonel. So she was actually the highest ranking African American woman at the time. So it was a big deal to be offered the opportunity to go into the Pentagon. And she said, I've been there. I didn't like it. And She left active duty, went back to school, finished her doctorate, moved with her husband, who had been a translator during the war, to Switzerland, where he completed his medical degree. And she went on to be the Dean of Women at several universities.
I was fascinated the way she turned it down, and she had no support from other young women.
That's hard to do because in the military, there's always some new opportunity in front of you. And it's very tempting to say, I want this one, and then I want that one, and then I want this one. It's kind of like me in the chocolate store.
Yeah. I'm aware that we've been talking for a while. There's a couple questions that first of all, you do have a book about pets, your dog, right?
I do.
Would you tell me a little about that? He sounds like my cat was, and I'm writing about her.
Well, there's one under my desk right now, and fortunately, we have not had a bark fest yet during this, which is always likely to happen. So at that time, I had a little dog named Benson, who I dearly loved, and Benson was adopted. I adopted him from this older couple who thought he was a little bit rambunctious. And then they felt guilty. They'd given him up, so they wrote him a letter. Well, he started writing them back and talking about his adventures. And so this grew to the point where I had a mailing list of about 80 people wanting to read his adventures every month. So I took all of those and put them together in a book. And then I had another little girl dog I had adopted named Maggie.
And she has.
And that was the second book, was her horning in and wanting to tell her story.
You said you rescue dogs. Do you have a particular group that you would like to mention?
I work with Homeward Bound Schnauzer Rescue. They're headquartered in Maryland, but we now have a group on the West Coast who helps as well. So I think over the last 3 to 4 years, I have fostered or helped transport or move up to 24. And I have 3 now because 1 I adopted and 2 refused to leave.
It's hard not to keep them, isn't it? Yeah. And then I wanted to ask you, you write about the young women in your last chapter, the girls who stepped out of line, about what to do. What's, where are they going? What's your advice to them? You mentioned some amazing young women.
Well, I think it's primarily just some of the things I've said, that you have to know where you want to go. You have to know what you want to do. I mean, is it logical for me to say I would like to be on The Voice or America's Got Talent? That is not logical, nor is it possible. So there are talents you have that you may not know, or you may think you have talents and you really do not. No one wants to hear me sing. I know that. That is not an option. So knowing yourself is the most important thing you can do, and giving yourself grace in this process because it's extremely difficult. I'll tell you a little bit about Shannon O'Brien. I met her several years ago speaking to a group of Maryland 99s, a group of women private pilots. Shannon at the time was a flight attendant with Delta Airlines, and she was also I think they call them game makers. It's like a cheerleader with the Baltimore Ravens. She wanted to join the Air Force and fly. She had worked for 4 years trying to get into the Air Force, into pilot training, and had not been successful. And she was running out of time because there is an age limit. And I said, would it help you if I wrote you a recommendation? And she said, yes. So I did. I don't know if that was helpful or not, but she got into the Air Force this last year. I was there to do her enlistment ceremony. I was there for her graduation from OCS and pinned on her lieutenant bars. And last week she graduated from flight school and got her wings. So it's knowing what you want, and you have to be willing to work for it. That flight school had to be the hardest thing ever. I know I couldn't have done it. And I'm incredibly proud of her for what she has done. And now she'll
By
want
the
me to
way,
fly with her when
Recommending
I
her,
go.
I suspect that really helped.
yeah, that's one of the things that I found interesting and inspirational from the girls that stepped out of line, because it wasn't an obvious progression. It wasn't a straight line progression. Sometimes they had roles that they didn't like because they were too boring, they were too clerical, they were maybe back in the US when they wanted to be in Europe and the action, whatever. But they always found a way to kind of get through it and get back to where they wanted to go, and with their end goal in mind, right? So I think that's inspirational for young people that are starting their career, that it's not going to be, yes, here's my end goal, here's where I want to get to. It's not going to be a linear progression, and there may be lulls in the action that you have to figure out a way to overcome.
Sure, or there's many things you think you want and you didn't get them.
No.
But that's fine,
Really,
because there
thank you
will be
for
something else. And there's many things I've tried that I've failed at. But then there's the one you succeed at, and by then you're ready and it's the right one.
Sal, do we want to do a wrap up? Because we
Yeah, well, my wrap up is very simple. I just want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for all the work and all the research that went into doing these books, because again, I can only imagine. We talked a little bit about how hard it is to get the information, and in some cases, it's obviously not possible to interview the person or sometimes even the person's family. So again, you have to go off of your research, off of documents, people that you can find that will talk to you, and it's unfortunate that in some cases there wasn't even enough information to be able to put a chapter together. Maybe, who knows, maybe something will happen in the future. But just want to thank you for all that work, for all that effort, for putting the book together, that I think again is, for me, and even more importantly for people starting out their professional careers in whatever field it is. I think it's inspirational. There was one person in particular that without revealing too much, because I want people to read the book, but she had an accident that almost would have made it impossible for her to conduct the operation she was conducting. But yes, she was able to work through it, adjust to it, and became very successful. So again, that's a story of overcoming hardship from an unfortunate accident. So thank you very much for putting the book together. I really appreciate it.
I'll leave you with the thought that there's a few movies coming out. There's a movie about Virginia Hall, who had the unfortunate accident, and it will be out in 2025. There's also a movie about the 6888 that should be on Netflix, hopefully by this November, and probably by next year, maybe a Broadway musical, which I'm looking forward to.
I want to thank you. Would you like to give a plug where people get your books?
Where to find it?
Yeah.
It's in bookstores. It's on Amazon. So it's out there.
Yeah, I think I got them off of Amazon, and not
I've
to
seen it.
plug anything in particular, but Amazon obviously is so prevalent that if you have an Amazon account, that's the way to go.
If you want to buy tomorrow, that's the way to go, and you don't have to go out and get it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can do like me. You can get the Kindle version and start reading immediately. So that's you can't beat that.
I recommend it. Anyone who is interested in history and wants to be inspired to read your books. I find that what women and men have done. Their stories are important to inspire us, especially today. We have a tendency only to hear the bad things, and we need inspiring stories. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um,
And I will mention or just add, there's always the library. And I love libraries, and libraries are more important now than ever with all of their offerings and their community involvement. And if you're going to buy a book, go to an independent bookstore.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for
yes,
coming on the
yes.
show. And
And a well-known independent bookstore.